very unique background. So I want to ask each of you individual questions. I'm going to start with Lesley. So a filmmaker, let's just say it's a documentary filmmaker.
Yes.
They are using certain archival footage, archival images. Do they have to get those rights and those clearances prior to hitting the festival circuit? Or can you sort of go out and just present the work unlicensed, and then if you get a distributor, then move forward with all that?
It's sort of a twofold question. Legally speaking, most film festivals, from my understanding, at least what they consider sort of I think it's like top 25, the ones that are considered the top filmmakers by the Producers Guild of America, they have requirements that you prove that you at least have the right to exhibit your film and all the material that's contained in it, and that would include either proving that you have your insurance, which is the insurance which protects the film from copyright claims, among other things, or that you provide license or evidence that you have those licenses. Smaller film festivals, it's my understanding, because they have less press, they have less, there's less chance of getting caught, and there's less distribution of the film in things like links. Probably do get away with that more often. It's probably not official though. But the problem is that if you're looking for getting picked up for distribution or exhibition at a film festival, and say for example someone from my company were to come to you and say, we really loved your documentary, we would like to look into acquiring it. They are coming to you probably with a quote of what they would expect to pay, expecting you to have licensed the material for their needs. So if you don't have those rights, you have to go get those rights before you get into any deal. Or you have to include the cost of getting those rights when you negotiate the deal. And if your fee that you get from a distributor or an exhibitor doesn't meet that total, the fee would then be on you probably. So it's a tricky thing. It's always to your benefit to have those rights. And in my opinion, it's always good to get options written into your film festival rights, where basically you say, if I get a TV deal, we will pay you an additional $2,000 or whatever the fee is for the license. Or you put an option in that says we will pay you the rights for all media, worldwide perpetuity, and then you have the rights to exhibit, distribute your film for the rest of copyright, essentially. So it's questionable. I know that there are film festivals that don't do that, although in terms of the legalities, if you publicly exhibit a film, you could be hit with a copyright claim.
And so for Peter, let's say a screenwriter wants to begin raising financing for a film, right? And when they're in sort of the pre-production mode, and let's say they're looking at Distrify, right, as like an option for once the film is made. Should they speak with you first before they even begin any kind of production, or is that something that you should wait until you're done with post and it's completed?
So Distrify doesn't really exist anymore. Just to clarify, that was my startup that was from 2010 to 2014, and then when I came to Vimeo, it kind of was done. And then for a while, Vimeo was investing in content, but when I left Vimeo in 2017, that also finished. So probably not the best question. Sorry.
Gotcha. All right. So let me ask you this. Going back to Vimeo for a second, the Vimeo on Demand platform.
Yeah.
Is that? Would you say that that's like a viable option now for filmmakers who are planning to self-distribute?
Yeah. So When I was at Vimeo, I did a lot of, I wrote a lot of case studies and did a lot of research on what worked for direct distribution. And I definitely think that it can be viable to make a film for a specific audience and release it and sell it directly to them. I think that that viability really depends on the type of film and the type of audience you're making it for. And the types of films that tend to work better for direct distribution tend to be either films made by someone who has an existing following or audience of some kind, or a film that's like a documentary about a particular subject or group that already has kind of gathered themselves online in some way so that they can be reached. And I'll give you a couple of quick examples that were very successful on Vimeo On Demand. There was a film that maybe some folks here have seen called Minimalism. It was eventually ended up on Netflix. Basically, there's a couple of guys who kind of started writing books and made a podcast and kind of developed a sort of concept around like having very few objects in your house. And these guys, over the course of these books and the podcast and everything, they developed a large audience who were interested in this way of living, and they decided to make a documentary about them doing a book tour and kind of explaining this philosophy. And so they already had this audience they built through this other media that was connected to them through email and their social media and stuff like that. And so when they made this documentary, they bypassed traditional distribution. They went straight to Vimeo On Demand to launch the film. And they had some advantages from that, not just because they had that existing audience, but because by selling direct, you can set your own pricing, you get a bigger piece of the pie. So they were selling this film, this documentary, to their that hardcore fan base they built up for $20 per download. And that included a bunch of extra materials and everything else, which in a post-DVD era, it's hard to include extra materials and bonus features. Like you can't really do that on Amazon. You can only do that if you're a major studio on iTunes, for example. So the ability for them to do that with that rabid fan base allowed them to sell a film at a higher price point than they could on those other platforms, and they were able to sell to a lot of people. And then they were able to take that, those revenue numbers, and say to Netflix, hey, look, we've got an audience willing to pay a lot of money for this, and there's a big group of them. We should do a deal. And so they were able to then take that into further distribution. And then on the an example on the fiction side. There is a kind of a group of filmmakers called Wong Fu Productions. I don't know if anyone's familiar with them. They tend to make...
They have short films on YouTube, right?
They have a lot of short films on YouTube. They don't see themselves as YouTubers as much as some of the other folks because they were making films before YouTube existed. And they're filmmakers. And if you watch their stuff, it's not the kind of YouTuber sort of giving you a beauty tutorial. They actually write scripts and make films. And but they did build a big following on YouTube, and they were making films primarily for Asian Americans like themselves who are typically underrepresented on the screen and on TV and in movies. And so they built up a following of people who wanted to see people like them on the screen. And they then wrote a script for a feature, and they took it all around Hollywood, and they had said, hey, we have all these people who like our stuff on YouTube. And the Hollywood people were like, yeah, but we don't believe in that. So they raised money through their fan base on Indiegogo or Kickstarter, one of those, and then they brought the film to Vimeo On Demand, and we worked with them on this. This is when I was still there, and we were occasionally investing in some projects with some additional marketing and that sort of support. But they were able to make a very successful release, targeting their fan base, expanding beyond that to other people who maybe weren't already their fans, but again, wanted to see different representation on screen. And that did very well, and that was able to turn into them getting further distribution, iTunes, etc., and then land a lucrative YouTube originals series deal after that. So I think there's a documentary and a fiction example. Both of those are based on building an audience over time and bringing them to your film. And if you're going to do anything that's direct distribution, you've got to think about that hard work, and that sometimes takes years to build people who are willing to pay for what you made.
All right. Now, for David, my question is regarding one of the biggest challenges for independent filmmakers is financing, right? You have a screenplay, you go up to people, you start, trying to pitch your script, try to get investors. Very often people look at you like crazy and say, I'm not going to invest in a movie. You were successful in that area, right? You were able to secure the financing. The Soul to Keep looks, it's a great film, looks fantastic. It did screen at our horror festival. So how did you go about securing the financing? I mean, so many filmmakers have difficulty even just getting $100, $500. You're able. How did you do it?
In our case, in many cases, people do go the Indiegogo, Kickstarter route where they really try to go. We didn't do that, and we probably should have to get a little more out of it. But for us, private equity, number one. Finding people that you know, or that your producers know, or your friends know, that have some money and might have some interest in putting it into something that's artistic. But you're not necessarily selling them on, hey, we want to make a movie and let's go, rah-rah-ree. You're selling them on the business of the film, and that you have the passion to execute, and the passion, the skills, and the drive, the tenacity to execute on that idea. And that's kind of what we did. We had this idea. We approached it from a business sense, that we knew that there is a substantial market for horror films. It's quite saturated too, but there's lots of people, there's a kind of a rabid fan base. And from there, we were able to pitch to a particular financier that gave us the most money, that we want to make a film that can make money, or that you can invest in, and that you can see a return and see how we can build from there and build an audience from there. And it's in a genre, so we checked off a bunch of things. It's in a genre that generally is nicer to movies that don't necessarily have recognizable talent. That was a big deal, because we weren't in a position to get talent for hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we knew that we could put a film together, but if you go into this saying, I want to make my dream drama, or my dream little comedy, okay, which is on the mind of all of us who are also writers, you're up against a really steep mountain, because those projects, comedies and dramas, unless you really kick butt, unless it's like a breakthrough, which you probably think that might be the case, but it might not end up being that way. And from my experience, comedies and dramas need recognizable talent to draw people to the great story that you're telling. So we picked a genre that doesn't necessarily need that. That was a checkoff on our list. Then cost. Don't try to make a $5 million film if it's your first one, or you're trying to raise funds and you're trying to scratch and claw and make that happen. So we had a script that we worked into virtually a single location that we knew that would keep the cost down. That would make that more attractive to financiers to say, we're not going to spend this much money here, so your potential return on investment, your risk, or your exposure has been greatly reduced. So that's important. And then you have to make sure that you have vision that can be conveyed. Vision and passion have to be conveyed to the rest of your group, your cast and your crew. We were able to, thanks to Patrick and a few other fine folks that worked on the film, we were able to get some crew for so much less that they would normally get paid. And we were able to get a cast that were able to do this for so little, just show up and we can defer some of that payment, whatever it is. You find a way to get greater talent attached to your project than your friend and your mom and your Aunt Sue and your little brother and your, you know what I mean? Like, if you just go with your close knit to play those roles or to hold the light or to, you're going to be really sorry. You're going to have a bad production and you're going to find that you've wasted everybody's time. So we went out to get talented people who were in shows on screen. Like, we had great equipment and we had great personnel in all the departments, and we made a film. That was just, of course, the beginning of it all, but how do you raise the money? We went into our investors with that strategy. We approached them saying, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. And then we're going to go out, know your direction, how are you going to distribute. If your plan is to go to Vimeo on demand, or similar, then talk about how that is a revenue stream, and realistically so, for your film. We went the route where we were going to find a sales rep, and sales reps converge every year at the American Film Market, AFM, in LA, I think it's November, Santa Monica, right? In November. And we went there, and we brought our trailer, and we went door to door, we had meetings, and we showed off, and we were able to get 12 different sales reps asking for our film. And we settled on one, of course. And that sales rep helped us get our distributor, our domestic distributor, and they're working on all the foreign. So we knew that going in. So we approached our financiers, or potential financiers, with that game plan. So you need to show the money people your plan. All the way. Like a book, a business plan. To show you, this is what we're doing, this is the great story, this is going to keep the price down, this is why we believe that this is going to make money. Look at these other films. They didn't have any stars, but look what they did. Things like that. You got to just be passionate and intelligent about your product, and you'll get somebody.
Lesley, I want to talk about music, music clearances. So if a filmmaker is in pre-production, they have a script, they're in development, and they have their dream song for a certain scene or various scenes in the film. How would one go about trying to acquire the rights? Because I was at a panel once, and one of the filmmakers on the panel said, you think it's impossible to get a famous song or from a famous artist, but she said, for 10 grand, we actually got a song from Kiss. And I was like, really? For 10 grand? She's like, yeah, we got that. So how would you approach that?
Well, I can't, it's so important if you feel that a song is vital to your film, whether it's a documentary or a narrative piece, and you really can argue it to the individuals who are your money people or your editors. If you're saying this scene works best, or it's essential that we have this song, there are, writing to an artist or writing to the administrator of their catalog and explaining, not being overly sentimental, but really explaining why the scene works artistically, or why the scene works for political or social reasons. You're doing a documentary about a social issue, an environmental issue, and you have a song that is really important because it speaks to what you're saying. The songwriter and the artist are artists too. I mean, they're making money, and I wouldn't suggest trying to, rip them off, but $10,000 for an independent film, when you can really explain eloquently why this song is needed, why the song works for the film. There are a lot of artists out there that will consider it. And not all of them. Some of them will just ignore anything that comes in where the offer is less than, $10,000 aside. And always remember the fact that you got to get your publishing and you got to get your recording rights. So, you could have $20,000 that you would be spending on a song. And there are artists who, if you offer anything less, they just won't look at the request. But if you have someone who, especially if they are aligned with your perspective, they'll consider it, or they'll write something in. Like the Kiss thing surprises me a little bit because they have been so focused on the finances.
I don't know
However,
what song it was.
Yeah.
It wasn't one of the
it might not have been one that the one who was more concerned with finances wrote, so then he wouldn't have as much say. But if you could really say why that song works, they will try and work with you. And maybe the Kiss thing was a case of, okay, I will give you the song for these rights for 5 years for festivals and theatrical. But if you sell it, or if you want to extend those rights, I'm going to put in here that you have to pay me additional money so that they'll be making money on the back end. And also with music, they do make royalties. So music that ends up in a film, ends up in a TV show that gets a lot of airplay, those writers are continually making money. So there's more reason for them to license things, sometimes even if they aren't getting a huge lump sum at the beginning.
And what if it's a documentary? What if tomorrow I decide to make a documentary about Justin Bieber, right? Like, how does that?
Justin Bieber's probably going to be a difficult one because of right of publicity. And that's the case with any big biographical film, except for, I believe, political. You have a lot more freedom with that. But Bieber would be difficult because of right of publicity. But if you were doing something on the artistic work of a songwriter, for example, and they have say in how things get used, which also would mean some editorial control from them, they might be a little bit more willing to give you things at cost. I've seen that, yeah.
So, Peter, a lot of your work in the world of distribution has been digital platforms, right? So, Vimeo, Distrify. I'm going to ask a similar question actually that I asked at the conference last night. Theatrical versus going straight to the online world. Do you think theatrical is still something that's necessary nowadays, or do you think you can meet with huge success just going straight to digital?
Do you mind if I add a couple to the last question before I answer that? Because there's a couple of great examples that we dealt with that I know from the past. Anyone see the short film Thunder Road? Great film, won Sundance, and it's basically a single take film where a guy kind of dances to Bruce Springsteen's song at a funeral. And he made that without permission. But then after it won Sundance, he wrote Bruce Springsteen a letter and showed the film. And I think that Bruce must have really appreciated the reverence that the film showed for it. And it was a short film that was going to be released on Vimeo for free. There wasn't really revenue to be made out of it. I'm sure he might have felt differently if there was revenue. But he managed to get that song for free for that short. And that's definitely the exception.
I think the feature version did really well in France, from what I was told.
Yeah, I'm sure for the feature version he licensed the song. Is my guess. I don't know for sure, but I would imagine he would have.
It's probably kind of like the Stephen King rule about, you know, if you're making a short film,
I'll give you.
he'll give it to you for $1. But if you want to go ahead and try and make that theatrical, you're going to be spending a pretty penny on it.
Right. So speaking of theatrical, and the value of theatrical, you know, I think that it's a challenging question because these days it's very hard to make money on theatrical for an independent release. That being said, if you do it in non-traditional ways, you can make a good amount of money from physical screenings. And I think there's a real advantage to having physical screenings because it encourages word of mouth in a way that streaming doesn't nearly as well. You know, you get a group of people in a room together and they watch a film together, they're going to talk about it, they're more likely to tell other people about it. It's just the nature of our social selves. With all this social media and digital and all that, I think real life social interaction is becoming more valuable. I'll give another example of a film that I think did theatrical in a way which is non-traditional in a very, very effective way. And I'm using the term theatrical quite loosely because this type of release isn't necessarily using you know, theater like this type of venue. It could be another type of venue. So there's a documentary that came out a few years ago called A Film About Coffee. And it's exactly what the title says. It's a film about coffee. And the film sort of taps into the sort of rise of the kind of specialty coffee movement with, you know, like beautiful latte art and, you know, lots of like reconditioned wood and people with, you know, like their mustaches twirled up and that sort of thing. It's a beautifully made film about that world, set in that world with they have all the famous roasters, the people who started Blue Bottle and Ritual Roasters and all this. And they knew that community would want to watch that film in physical locations. So they had a strategy to invite coffee shops and roasters around the world to host screenings. And they would charge a license fee for every screening that was held. And it was up to the local coffee shop to find a venue. It might be a theater like this. It might be, if it's a big enough coffee shop, they might have a screen in the place and charge tickets. Or it might be another venue like a church. And they had hundreds of these screenings, charging, you know, probably an average $1,000 per screening as a license fee. And their fee would vary depending on the number of seats in the venue. And that was a really powerful way to grow awareness of the film. And they started that before they did their digital release, partly because if something's online and you're less likely to go out and see it. But while that was going on, they started their digital release on Vimeo, and then those two things started to feed off of each other. And if you can do that in a really you know, symbiotic way, then I totally believe in the simultaneous release. Because you get people coming to the venue, they see the film, they tweet about it, they tell their friends about it. Maybe their friends aren't in a place where they can see a screening, they can go online and purchase it. Or they can send an email or a tweet to their local coffee shop and say, hey, when are you guys going to host the screening for us? And so that became a really successful release by combining those two things around a fan community that was eager to see something with other people who shared the same passions as them. I think though, you know, I mean, you should probably answer this question as well from your perspective, I would guess.
Okay. Yes, theatrical would be nice. You bring up really good points about how the word of mouth can spread through a theatrical release. We found difficulty in the sense that to get it in theaters in a more traditional sense, it costs. And the cost-benefit analysis suggests that you know, independent films don't necessarily need a theatrical release, and that might be true. But what you're saying about catching fire, or building a brand through having theatrical releases, that's important too. It's not just getting a theater, it's also getting the butts in the seats. How do you do that? Now, if you already have a fan base, like some of the other examples that you had mentioned, Peter, earlier, that makes sense. But if you are just trying to build your audience and trying to gain followers on Instagram, trying to get like people interested, you don't quite have a fan base yet. So, in the traditional sense, somebody's got to spend some money on publicity and advertising, the P&A of it all, and that costs. So now you're looking at the cost that might cost, likely will cost more than your film. So now you're out on the money game. Your investors, or whoever is, or the distributor who wants to pay for that, is out that money, plus the money that it costs that you want to get back on production and distribution. So I guess the overall point is, in many cases, I would say in most cases, by my experience, it's a difficult proposition. We still retain our theatrical rights because the Orchard, which is 1091 Media, they're not that interested in the theatrical because of this very problem, that it costs a lot of money to get them in the seats. And what happens? You got 500 theaters, and you got to publicize that all over the place, and they might spend millions of dollars, and you might make $1 million in the theaters. You just lost money, and that money's still owed back to the distributor. So as a filmmaker, then you don't see any more money coming back to you. So it's a big risk for an independent filmmaker to just say, look, I was gung-ho. Before we even made this film, I was like, we're going to get a theatrical release today, and all this stuff. I came to the conclusion that I think a better, safer bet, monetarily speaking, that you get a good, strong digital and on-demand release. You get to Netflix or Amazon Prime and Hulu, and you keep on that circuit. And then you get some foreign deals, different countries that will be interested in your project, and that's where you make your money. So,
just curious, your film is on, so you're on iTunes and Amazon and Google Play and all that.
All those.
Yep. DirecTV. So.
DirecTV, on demand. If you go to your cable box, Spectrum. I don't know what you all have, but Fios.
Yeah.
Anywhere you can rent or buy the film.
Yeah,
that's what we got.
I was just curious, which of the platforms are you most a fan of? Which of the best for you?
I think that we don't have the numbers in yet, but it's suggested that the on-demand side, the video on-demand side, is performing very well. We did well on iTunes, and that's a thing that people. I'll say this: the intel that I have on my project is that in the digital space, as in iTunes, Google Play, PlayStation, Fandango Now, like this kind of thing, iTunes is by far the leader, and Amazon Prime Video, where you rent and buy. I would say the order is iTunes, Amazon, then PlayStation, Google Play, Xbox. Those things are a little further down, and so the leader in that market is iTunes. So if that's of any interest to anybody here, or if you're self-distributing, iTunes might be the place to go.
Let me ask, does anybody have any questions from the audience? Anyone at all? Questions? Okay, go ahead.
I have a question for Lesley about when you're developing a script, when you're just in the writing phase, is it better to take any brand name and change it and just kind of avoid any licensing, or is it better to just use in your dream what you would be able to use, and then if anything happens with the screenplay, deal with it then in terms of either licensing or changing?
So I'm going to respond based on sort of anecdotal information from our developers and developers of that side of it, because that is an area where probably before the project has even been greenlit, the script would be coming to them. I've heard that it's actually better to have the brand names that you feel are important, that would be on the wish list, that you would want to have in a project if you had the ability. Because there are times when you really feel like, this would be better if it wasn't generic, and it's easier to write, with the thought process that you might need to replace it, and you might need to make it into something generic. But because writing should be much more of the creative process for the individual, and then you're presenting it, I've never heard of people saying that, oh, there's too much branding in this. I mean, there probably have been cases of that, but I've never heard of it being a deal breaker.
Any other questions? Yes?
I just had a question about copywriting your material before pushing it to your networks. I guess when is it best to copyright it in advance before you do concept, or once you've done the festival circuit, you're kind of safe with the copyright, and when you're going into pitch, how much of having the copyright?
Are you talking about scripts or complete? Scripts, I'm told, representation, you might not need the copyright immediately. If it's based on anything, or if you've heard of things, of it being similar in any way, it might be better to copyright it when you have that just as a protection. But your literary agent, or if you have any type of representation like that, should be guiding you in that area as well.
Anyone else? Questions? Actually, I have a question for David. So you were in the TV world initially, MTV, VH1, Viacom companies. For screenwriters, what do you think is more marketable now? A TV pilot type of script or a feature-length script? Having come from the TV world and now you're in the indie film world?
If you're a screenwriter, it's a tough question. If you're into the independent space, if you're a screenwriter looking to just sell your project to an entity, to a network or a studio or a production company, my personal opinion is that you have a much better chance to go the route of TV episodic, pilot, because there's so much more content in that space. Films, by comparison, if you were to go by hours, I'm sure we could find that information online somewhere, but I'm 100% positive that there are phenomenally more hours of televised content or streaming content that's TV episodics than there are films. So you have a better shot at getting something sold. This is not talking about you writing something and then getting it done yourself to then sell later, at festivals and getting distribution like we did. So that's a different process. But if you're talking about just writing a screenplay or a pilot, and then you want to present that to someone else, an agent who then can get you to the networks, I would say that an episodic is a pilot for a new idea, and you can't, by the way, you wouldn't walk in the room with just a pilot. You probably would need some kind of story Bible that tells you what this kind of looks like beyond the pilots, and what's this character about, all the different characters. You're going to need all of that too.
Yeah, also for Peter, like at Vimeo, for example, did you find that filmmakers were having more success with individual films or those who are releasing series?
I think that you can build an audience over time with a series, and that allows you to, potentially be more successful over time. But I think it's really hard to make a series independently and make it well. Whereas I think if you want to make an independent film, you're more likely to make a higher quality product. There was a sort of period, and I think it's still going on, where people try to make web series to kind of get interest in what they're doing, and it's pretty rare for those to really take off. But when they do, it can be really successful. Like we released one, High Maintenance.
I was just going to say, that started on Vimeo, High Maintenance, right?
Yeah, so that one was 6 to 10 minute episodes. I think what you realize though, if you make it 10-part, 10-minute episodes, you've effectively made a feature, and you can't sell a 10-minute times 10. I mean, there are rare exceptions. Again, like high maintenance, a couple of other things. But if you're trying to sell 100 minutes of content, then you can sell a feature film, but a 10 by 10 web series, people won't pay for that. They will want to watch it for free. So I just think that's something to think about in terms of what your financing structure is. Like if you're just trying to build an audience and you have that luxury of time and money that you can do that, it can be a lot more effective from that perspective. But it's from a business perspective, it's harder to make it work. I don't know if that's a good answer or more confusing.
Lesley, if a filmmaker has gone the festival route, they haven't landed the distributor that they would want, and let's just say they finally say, you know what, I'm going to go YouTube, right? And let's just say it's a documentary and it has archival footage or it has some, famous song or something. If you're going the YouTube route and you're looking to make a couple bucks through Google AdSense and that, you're going that route, would you recommend spending the money on licensing the rights if you're going straight YouTube? Not YouTube paid for, but just free.
Legally speaking, I don't know if I can answer that because I know what is on YouTube and it's just copyright infringement galore. But my area is in trying to prevent people from getting their things taken down and essentially taken down. I mean, for us, it would be getting hit with a copyright infringement claim. And if you have any experience with this, I would imagine that if you made something that didn't have clearances and it was on YouTube and it got taken down, it wouldn't go back up, or it wouldn't go back up as is. I think I'm going to have to bypass that question just because I don't want to. I know what people do, and I don't want to encourage it, but I also don't want to. I don't want to plead ignorant on it.
I have one more question about that. Now I don't know if you're allowed to answer this one, but if you have all these musicians on YouTube, right, and a lot of doing cover songs and stuff. Are you allowed to do that, or are you allowed? What if you did a documentary on like a cover band? Is that allowed?
Well, the thing on the YouTube covers is they probably have not received the publishing claim. If you're recording it yourself, you own your master recording. But you could have it taken down for infringement of the composition. I don't think a lot of people do that. And also YouTube has, from my understanding, they are outright getting agreements with publishers now. Like, a lot of the music videos that you see are being put up by the labels. So it's an odd situation. Now, if you were doing a documentary about a musician, there was a documentary a while ago that I saw about, and it was a little bit inflammatory, but it was about a musician. I'm pretty sure that they would have had a fair use claim, and then that stuff wouldn't have been taken down because fair use is a legal argument that you can use.
Right. Well, like there's a documentary about a Bruce Springsteen tribute band that I saw. Now, it's got clips in there of them performing the music. If they want to distribute that, or they get a distributor, do they have to get the rights to those songs? I mean, they're a tribute band, so how does that?
That I'd have to look at it, but you could potentially argue fair use that in order to tell the story of this band, you have to use the music. Fair use is a very tricky issue because you can only material in it. If you have a great film about a Bruce Springsteen cover band and you don't want to license Bruce Springsteen music, or it's proving to be too difficult to license Bruce Springsteen music, but you could go to an attorney and say, this is why I need to have this music in here. And all of those arguments could be made. And the attorney that you hire, the attorney that you work with, an intellectual copyright attorney, intellectual property and copyright attorney. If they agree with it and they say, yes, you can probably get E&O insurance under this argument, which is errors and omission. I realized you forgot to mention that. Your fair use argument could stand, and you could get distribution and exhibition without having to license that material. Now, the reason why fair use is so sticky is that it's been used for arguments of just not wanting to pay fees. And that is not a justification. Saying it's too expensive is not a justification to have fair use. And there are things that prove to not be that expensive, but you still don't want to license it for any number of reasons. Probably something like the Bruce Springsteen documentary that you mentioned would be, the filmmaker would be arguing fair use.
All right, good. Can I add to that? I think on the YouTube thing, you can. I don't like the fact that there's a lot of people recording this, so it's the most coy way possible. YouTube has a technology which is called, I think, Content ID or something. So what they do is they scan every video that's uploaded, and they look for copyrighted material, whether that's images, video, or music. And they have deals with a lot of the rights holders for that content, and not always, those deals don't always say that the videos will be taken down. And I don't recommend doing this, but I know it can be done. In some cases, you can make a short film that has music in it that you don't have the rights to, and the policy that YouTube has with the rights holder may be that rather than taking your short film down, they're just taking ads on it and send money to the rights holder. Like I said, I don't recommend doing that, and it's not a guarantee because it depends on the specific deal they have with that specific song, and you have no way of knowing that in advance. So you only find out after you upload your film. Sometimes they'll say, hey, you've got copyrighted material in here, we're taking this down. Sometimes we'll say, oh, you've got copyrighted material in here, we're going to put ads on this and monetize it for that other person.
Actually, I guess my question with that would be because you still committed a copyright infringement. If something were to happen and they said, this thing has been up for 5 years, but we're still going to claim copyright, I do wonder if I wonder what the legal argument would be, because you can really get hit with big fees if you commit copyright infringement. That thing that used to be on the VHS thing of like punishable by law. I mean, I do wonder how it stands, even if they do have an agreement like that on YouTube.
I mean, like I said, I wouldn't recommend doing it, but I think your lawyer might have a decent argument to say, well, you've been earning money off of this video for those 5 years. How are you suing me for damages when you've been actually making money and I haven't? I don't know. So
if YouTube gave you notice, like you said, instead of giving you the notice to cease and desist, they say, instead, we're going to monetize it for the artist. They gave you that notice. That's probably something you could use in a legal way, is my guess.
Probably.
So we got like 2 minutes left. We had a couple questions here. Sorry.
Are resources anywhere where you can understand creating a contract for a self-published or
In terms of licensing a novel,
getting permissions and what's there for them for their
there are, and unfortunately, I cannot remember some of the websites off the top of my head. If you wouldn't mind sticking around, I'd be happy to get your email and take a look, because one of the really good resources is intellectual property law, and there are tons of websites about that, and most of them include things like getting life rights and literary rights. But I can take a look because I do know that there are some websites, I just can't remember them off the top of my head.
And yeah, one more question.
Dave, I was wondering, did you have a P&A budget for the film? And how important is it not going to be
So your question is, do we have a P&A budget, publicity advertising, for our film, and how important is that when you just go straight to digital and so on? good news is the P&A budget for an independent film, one, you need one. And the other good news is that it's nowhere near the cost of what studios spend, right? They spend 25 million, whatever, crazy. But as an independent filmmaker, the bad news is it's still going to cost. And so my recommendation is not necessarily advertising. We've done a few things where we try Instagram and Facebook ads and try to promote, these boosts, these postings. But really, it's about getting a PR firm, a publicist, who's positioned in the area in the market that you need. So for us, we went after a PR firm that handles power and is closely tied to the digital space for horror magazines that are on the web, so that we can get exclusives for our trailer with various. I don't want to get into which ones, but various websites that have a following, and that will get people interested, and they go and click on your trailer. That is worth it.
It was effective because you guys got a lot of good reviews on a lot of the horror, horror publications.
Right, on the horror publications, Dread Central and whatever, Horror Connection, Fangoria.
All right, so we are out of time. So I want to thank our speakers and thank you all for being here.